The surf crashes against the reef with a sound like distant thunder. July 21st, 1944. EO 8:30 hours. Marine Private First Class. Frank Witek crouches in the landing craft, knuckles white against his M1 Garand. The diesel fumes mix with salt spray. Around him, 200 other Marines press shoulder to shoulder, silent except for the mechanical rhythm of breathing through clenched teeth. Then the ramp drops. What happens in the next 30 seconds will haunt him for the rest of his life. What happens over the next 21 days will become one of the most brutal island battles in the Pacific War. A fight so savage that it won't officially end for another 28 years. This is the complete story of the Battle of Guam, the liberation no one talks about, the island that fought back. Guam wasn't supposed to be this hard. American military planners had calculated 3 days, maybe 4 at most, to recapture the island from Japanese forces. After all, this was American territory, seized by Japan within hours of Pearl Harbor back in December 1941. The locals were American citizens who had endured 2.5 years of brutal occupation. Intelligence suggested maybe 10,000 Japanese defenders, mostly support troops. Intelligence was catastrophically wrong. The island stretches 30 miles long and 9 miles wide at its broadest point. Volcanic rock formations create natural fortresses. Dense jungle covers 70% of the terrain. Cliffs rise 200 feet straight up from the beaches. The Japanese had 20 months to prepare since they knew, absolutely knew, the Americans would come back for Guam. And they had prepared something special. Lieutenant General Takeshi Takashina commanded not 10,000 troops but 19,000 hardened soldiers and sailors. He'd spent every single one of those 20 months turning Guam into a killing ground. Concrete pillboxes with interlocking fields of fire, artillery pieces hidden in caves with multiple firing positions. Machine gun nests camouflaged so perfectly that Marines would walk within 10 feet without seeing them. The defensive strategy was simple and terrifying. Let the Americans land, then destroy them on the beaches where naval gunfire couldn't help without killing their own men. But Takashina had made one critical miscalculation. He underestimated what Americans would do to take back what was theirs. He didn't understand the fury of Marines who'd spent 2 years island hopping across the Pacific, perfecting the brutal art of amphibious warfare. He couldn't comprehend the determination of the Chamorro people still hiding in the jungle, waiting to help their liberators any way they could. The stage was set for something unprecedented in Pacific warfare, an island battle that would make Tarawa look like a skirmish, that would introduce new levels of savagery to an already savage war. The invasion fleet began gathering in early July 1944, 274 ships, 56,000 men. The 3rd Marine Division under Major General Alan Turnage would hit the northern beaches near Agat. The 1st Provisional Marine Brigade under Brigadier General Lemuel Shepard would assault the southern beaches near Agat. The Army's 77th Infantry Division would follow as reserve and reinforcement. For 13 days before the landing, American ships and aircraft pounded Guam. Battleships hurled 16-inch shells into defensive positions. Carrier aircraft dropped thousands of tons of bombs. Cruisers and destroyers worked over the beach defenses with methodical precision. The bombardment created an illusion of safety. Surely nothing could survive that much explosive force. Surely the defenders would be too stunned to fight effectively. Surely. Frank Witek grew up in Darby, Connecticut, working in factories before the war. Nothing about his background suggested he'd become a legend. Medium height, medium build, quiet disposition. The kind of guy who did his job without complaint and looked after his buddies. He'd joined the Marines in 1942, trained at Parris Island, and survived the hell of Bougainville, where he'd earned a reputation for staying calm under fire. Now he was 23 years old and charging up a beach called Asan Point with Japanese machine guns tearing apart everything around him. The landing craft hits the reef 500 yards offshore, too shallow to go further, too deep to wade safely with full combat gear. Over the side, move, move, move. Witek drops into water up to his chest. The weight of his ammunition, grenades, and equipment tries to drag him down. Mortar rounds begin dropping into the surf. The explosions create columns of white water mixed with coral fragments that slash exposed skin like razors. 200 yards to the beach. Might as well be 200 miles. A machine gun opens up from a concealed position on the left. The water around Witek erupts in white splashes as bullets strike the surface. The Marine next to him, a kid from Ohio whose name Witek never learned, simply stops moving and sinks beneath the surface, the water around him turning red. Keep moving. Don't stop. Don't think. The beach finally comes into reach. Witek throws himself down behind a pile of coral rubble that provides maybe 6 inches of cover. Machine gun fire kicks up sand all around him. A mortar round lands 20 feet away, the concussion feeling like a giant fist punching him in the chest. This is where training takes over. This is where the body moves while the conscious mind goes somewhere else, somewhere safer. Witek spots the machine gun nest, a concrete pillbox partially hidden by palm fronds, barrel protruding through a narrow slit. He signals to 3 other Marines pinned down nearby. They understand instantly. No words needed. Covering fire. Witek sprints left while the others pour M1 rounds at the pillbox slit. 20 yards, 15, 10. He pulls a grenade, yanks the pin with his teeth like they showed him in training, and throws it through the firing slit. The explosion is muffled. Smoke pours out. 1 gun down. 17 more reveal themselves immediately, all firing at once. Further south on the Agat beaches, the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade faces a different nightmare. The beaches here are narrower, bordered by swamps on one side and cliffs on the other. There's nowhere to maneuver, nowhere to take cover. The Japanese have pre-sighted every square foot of sand. Private Carl Jensen from Wisconsin takes cover behind a disabled Amtrak, an amphibious tractor that caught a direct artillery hit and now sits half submerged in the surf, burning. The metal is hot enough to blister skin on contact, but it's the only cover for 30 yards. Through the smoke, Jensen sees something that makes his blood freeze. Japanese soldiers are emerging from spider holes in the beach itself, positions dug vertically into the sand with camouflaged covers. They'd been hidden there the entire time, letting Marines pass right over them. Now they're emerging behind the American lines, firing into Marines from the rear. The beaches become a confused nightmare of close-quarters combat. Marines bayonet Japanese soldiers who pop out of holes like lethal jack-in-the-boxes. Japanese grenades sail through the air, detonating with sharp cracks. The carefully planned assault dissolves into dozens of individual firefights, each one a desperate struggle for survival. By 1,000 hours, 90 minutes after the first landing craft touched down, both beachheads are secured enough to begin pushing inland. Secured is a relative term. Japanese artillery from the high ground continues to pound the beaches. Snipers tied into palm trees pick off Marines with methodical precision. The secured beach is still killing 20 men per hour. The butcher's bill for just reaching the beach, 350 casualties, and the real fighting hasn't even started yet. Captain John Apurgis leads a company of the 9th Marines pushing inland from Asan Point. They move through coconut groves where every shadow could hide a sniper, every fallen log could conceal a machine gun. The volcanic soil here is hard as concrete, making it impossible to dig proper foxholes. Men scrape out shallow depressions and pray they're enough. Apergis is a veteran of Guadalcanal and Bougainville. He knows how island warfare works. But Guam is different. The terrain is more challenging, the defenses are more sophisticated, and the Japanese are fighting with a desperation he hasn't seen before. His company advances 300 yards in 4 hours. Every yard costs blood. The jungle here is unlike anything in training films. Vines thick as a man's arm hang between trees. The undergrowth is so dense that visibility drops to 10 feet. The heat is suffocating, over 90 degrees with humidity approaching 100%. Men carrying 60-pound packs struggle for breath in the thick air, and somewhere in all that green hell, Japanese soldiers wait in positions they've prepared for months. The first night ashore is when veterans earn their pay and new replacements either survive or don't. 200 hours, July 22nd. The jungle comes alive with sound. Japanese infiltration tactics on Guam reach a new level of psychological warfare. Small groups of soldiers crawl through American lines in complete darkness, moving with patience that takes hours to cover 50 yards. They carry grenades, knives, and sometimes small explosive charges designed to destroy American equipment. But the real goal isn't killing Americans. The real goal is preventing them from sleeping. An exhausted enemy makes mistakes. A sleep-deprived defender has slow reactions. The Japanese understand that the human mind begins breaking down after 72 hours without proper sleep. Marine positions around the Asan beachhead report movement all night long. Sometimes it's real infiltrators. Sometimes it's nervous sentries seeing threats in every shadow. Sometimes it's land crabs, enormous creatures that sound exactly like a man crawling through underbrush. The Marines fire at everything because you can't take the chance. By dawn, every man on the line has fired at least a full magazine into the darkness. Some have fired 3 or 4, and they've gotten maybe 90 minutes of broken sleep in 12 hours. This is sustainable for one night, maybe 2. The battle is already 4 days old. What makes Guam particularly brutal is the terrain's vertical dimension. The Japanese hold the high ground, a ridgeline running roughly north-south through the center of the island. From elevated positions, they can observe American movements across the entire invasion area. They can direct artillery fire with devastating accuracy. They can plan counterattacks based on perfect intelligence about American positions and strength. The Marines have to go up. The 3rd Marine Division begins pushing toward the escarpment, a volcanic formation rising 200 feet almost vertically from the jungle floor. Intelligence reports suggest Japanese positions at the top. Intelligence doesn't mention that the entire cliff face is honeycombed with caves, each one containing machine guns, mortars, or riflemen with perfect fields of fire downward. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Murray commands the 2nd Battalion, 9th Marines. His orders are clear. Take the escarpment. How he accomplishes this is left to his discretion, which is military terminology for figure it out yourself. Murray surveys the cliff face through binoculars. Every obvious approach is a killing ground. Every path up is swept by multiple machine guns. Any direct assault will result in 70% casualties before his men get halfway up. So he decides not to go up. He decides to go around and then up from the flank where defenses are lighter. This requires marching his battalion 3 miles through dense jungle, crossing a swamp and approaching the escarpment from an angle the Japanese won't expect. It will take 12 hours instead of 2. It will expose his men to sniper fire and ambush the entire way, but it might avoid a frontal assault bloodbath. The march begins at dawn on July 24th. Within an hour, Murray's battalion is taking casualties from snipers they never see. Japanese soldiers in trees, in spider holes, behind fallen logs. Each sniper fires once or twice and then melts back into the jungle before Marines can pinpoint the location. By noon, the temperature reaches 95 degrees. Men begin collapsing from heat exhaustion. The battalion medic, a Navy corpsman named Robert McCard, treats 17 cases of heat stroke in 3 hours. The Marines leave their helmets behind, taking the risk of head wounds in exchange for slightly lower body temperatures. It's a desperate calculation in a place where all calculations are desperate. The swamp crossing nearly breaks the battalion. The water is chest deep and choked with vegetation. Men lose their footing in sucking mud that grabs boots and doesn't let go. Equipment gets soaked. Weapons get fouled with muck that has to be cleaned immediately, or they'll jam at the worst possible moment. And the Japanese know they're there. Mortar rounds begin dropping into the swamp. There's no cover, no concealment, just exposed men in water, trying to move fast enough to escape the killing zone while moving slow enough not to exhaust themselves. Murray loses 11 men in the swamp crossing, dead or too badly wounded to continue. He keeps moving because stopping means dying. By nightfall on the 24th, his battalion reaches the base of the escarpment from the flank approach. They've traveled 3 miles as the crow flies, but closer to 7 miles of actual movement through impossible terrain. Every man is exhausted. Most haven't eaten since the previous day. Some haven't slept in 40 hours. And tomorrow they climb. Meanwhile, on the southern beachhead near Agat, the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade faces a different challenge. The Japanese have spent the past 3 days reinforcing their positions on the hills overlooking the beachhead. American artillery and air support have done damage, but the cave systems make it nearly impossible to destroy defensive positions completely. General Lemuel Shepard knows he needs to break out of the confined beachhead, or his brigade will be ground down by attrition. The Japanese hold Mount Alafan, a 400-foot hill dominating the entire southern sector. Take the hill, take the initiative. Fail to take the hill, and the beachhead becomes a grave. He assigns the mission to the 4th Marines, a regiment with a particular chip on their shoulder. The original 4th Marines surrendered at Corregidor in 1942, one of the most bitter defeats in Marine Corps history. This reconstituted regiment is desperate to prove they've earned the right to carry that number again. The assault on Mount Alafan begins July 25th at 0600 hours, following a 30-minute artillery preparation. Shells scream overhead and hammer the hilltop in a display of firepower that shakes the ground 2 miles away. Surely nothing can survive that bombardment. Surely. Captain Frank Houghton leads Company E up the southern slope. The terrain is so steep that men use their hands as much as their feet, pulling themselves up by grabbing onto rocks and roots. They carry full combat loads, weapon, ammunition, grenades, water, rations, adding 60 pounds to every man's body weight. Halfway up, the Japanese open fire. Machine guns hidden in caves sweep the slope with interlocking fire. Mortars drop with the accuracy of pre-sighted coordinates because that's exactly what they are. The Japanese have had months to map every approach and calculate precisely where rounds need to fall. The American artillery preparation hadn't touched the main defensive positions at all. It had merely killed some exposed troops and alerted the defenders that an assault was coming. Houghton's company takes 30% casualties in the first 10 minutes. This is the moment when junior officers earn their pay or die trying. Houghton identifies a cave entrance pouring machine gun fire into his men. He takes 3 Marines and works his way up a gully that provides partial cover. The approach takes 20 minutes of crawling through terrain so steep they're sometimes moving on a 45-degree angle. They reach a position 15 yards from the cave entrance. Houghton pulls a thermite grenade, designed to burn at over 4,000 degrees, and throws it into the cave mouth. The screaming starts immediately, but the machine gun keeps firing because there are multiple soldiers in that cave system and the ones in the back just move forward to replace the ones in front. It takes 3 grenades and a satchel charge of TNT before that position goes silent. 1 cave cleared. The Japanese have built 73 caves into Mount Alafan, July 25, 1944, day 5 of the battle. The situation is desperate. American forces hold 2 separate beachheads with no connection between them. Both beachheads are under constant artillery fire from Japanese positions on the high ground. Casualties are mounting faster than replacements can arrive. The 3-day battle has already lasted nearly a week with no end in sight. Some staff officers are quietly discussing the possibility that Guam might be a strategic failure, too costly to continue, too important to abandon. And then 3 things happen simultaneously that change everything. First, Lieutenant Colonel Murray's flanking maneuver pays off. His battalion reaches the top of the escarpment from an unexpected direction and begins rolling up Japanese positions from the side. The defenders had prepared for frontal assaults, not attacks from their flank. Within 3 hours, Murray's Marines control a half-mile section of the ridgeline. It's the first significant American breakthrough since the landing. Second, the 4th Marines finally fight their way to the summit of Mount Alafan after a day of savage close-quarters combat. Captain Houghton plants an American flag on top at 17:30 hours, while Japanese artillery immediately begins targeting the summit. But the flag stays up, and from that height, American observers can now direct artillery fire onto Japanese positions that had been untouchable for 5 days. Third, Frank Wietek does something that will earn him a Medal of Honor and save dozens of lives in the process. The 9th Marines are pushing through a coconut grove near Fonte Hill. Intelligence reports suggest light resistance. Intelligence is, once again, catastrophically wrong. The Japanese have established a defensive position around a plateau with multiple pillboxes arranged in a semicircle. Each pillbox can cover the others. It's a textbook killing ground. Wietek's platoon walks straight into it at 14:20 hours. The first burst of machine gun fire kills the lieutenant and 2 sergeants. The platoon goes to ground, pinned down with no cover except shallow depressions in the coral soil. More machine guns open up. Then mortars start dropping. The Japanese have rehearsed this exact scenario dozens of times. They know precisely how to trap Americans in this terrain and methodically destroy them. The platoon has maybe 10 minutes before casualties become unsustainable. Someone needs to do something suicidal. Wietek stands up. He grabs his M1 Garand and sprints directly at the nearest pillbox. Machine gun fire erupts around him. Coral fragments kicked up by bullets sting his legs. He doesn't slow down, doesn't flinch, just runs with the single-minded determination of a man who has stopped caring whether he lives or dies and now only cares about getting the job done. 20 yards from the pillbox, he throws a grenade. It sails through the firing slit perfectly. The explosion is muffled but effective. 1 gun down. Wietek doesn't stop. He wheels left and charges the second pillbox. This crew has seen him coming and adjusts their fire. Rounds snap past his head close enough that he feels the air displacement. He dives behind a fallen palm trunk and comes up firing his rifle at the machine gun slit, trying to force them to pull back from the opening. It works for maybe 3 seconds, long enough for Wietek to get within grenade range, long enough for him to make the throw. The grenade bounces off the concrete exterior and rolls back toward him. He grabs it and throws it again. This time it goes through the slit. This time it detonates inside. This time that gun goes permanently silent. 2 pillboxes neutralized. 4 more still operational. Wheatek's platoon begins moving, using the brief opportunity to advance while the remaining defenders adjust their fire patterns. But Wheatek isn't done. He spots the third pillbox, this one elevated slightly on a coral rise that gives it perfect fields of fire over the entire area. Taking out that position will allow the entire platoon to advance. Failing to take it out means staying pinned down until Japanese reinforcements arrive or mortar fire does its inevitable work. He charges again. The defenders have figured out his pattern now and concentrate fire on his approach vector. The ground erupts around him in a curtain of machine gun impacts. How he isn't hit defies probability. Maybe it's luck. Maybe it's divine intervention. Maybe it's just that in war, impossible things sometimes happen. Wheatek reaches the coral rise. The machine gun barrel is protruding through its slit, traversing left and right, looking for him. He stays below the firing line, pressed against the concrete exterior. He pulls his last grenade. This is it. One chance. The throw is awkward from this angle. The grenade hits the edge of the firing slit and bounces sideways. For a heart-stopping moment, it looks like it will roll back down toward Wheatek. Then it tips forward and disappears into the pillbox interior. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. 1 second. The explosion blows out through the firing slit in a gout of smoke and flame. The machine gun stops firing. Wheatek's platoon advances through the gap he's created. They overrun the remaining pillboxes with grenades and rifle fire. Within 30 minutes, they control the entire position. An action that should have resulted in 50% casualties and possible tactical failure instead costs 7 wounded and 0 dead. Frank Wheatek survives the war. He receives the Medal of Honor from President Truman in October 1945. He never talks about this day, not even to his family. When pressed, he just says he did what needed to be done. That's all. What historians later discover makes Wheatek's actions even more remarkable. Each of those pillboxes contained 6 to 8 Japanese soldiers. He charged and destroyed 3 positions while outnumbered 20 to 1, moving across open ground under direct machine gun fire without support and using only grenades and his rifle. The statistical probability of survival was effectively 0. He did it anyway. This is what makes the Medal of Honor different from other decorations. Not just courage under fire. Every combat soldier shows courage. Not just effective action. Every good soldier performs effectively. The Medal of Honor represents a level of individual action that defies normal human behavior. A conscious decision to accept certain death if necessary to save your brothers in arms. But Wheatek's action, as extraordinary as it is, represents just one moment in one location. The Battle of Guam is still far from over. The breakthrough at the escarpment and the capture of Mount Alafan have created opportunities, but exploiting those opportunities will require pushing through the most difficult terrain yet: the island's interior jungle and the final Japanese defensive line. July 26th marks the beginning of the end for organized Japanese resistance, though no one knows that yet. The 2 American beachheads finally link up near the village of Agat, creating a continuous front line stretching across the southern half of the island. The 77th Infantry Division begins landing, adding fresh troops to a battle that has exhausted both Marine divisions. General Takashina faces the reality that his carefully prepared defensive positions are falling one by one. He makes a decision that will define the final phase of the battle. A massive counterattack designed to split American forces and drive them back to the beaches where they can be destroyed by the concentrated fire from positions that still remain in Japanese hands. The counterattack comes the night of July 25th, 26th. Japanese forces estimate nearly 5,000 troops infiltrate through jungle paths they know intimately. moving in the darkness toward American forward positions near Mount Tenjo. The plan is sophisticated. Multiple simultaneous assaults at different points along the line, creating confusion and preventing American forces from concentrating their response. At 0200 hours, Japanese soldiers armed with grenades and bayonets assault Marine positions on the southern flank. The fighting is immediate and brutal. Men grapple in the darkness, unable to distinguish friend from enemy except by feel and sound. Japanese soldiers scream "Banzai" and crash into foxholes. Marines fire their weapons at point-blank range, the muzzle flashes illuminating nightmarish scenes of close combat. Corporal Luther Skaggs, Jr. from Kentucky finds himself in hand-to-hand combat with 3 Japanese soldiers simultaneously. His rifle is empty. He swings it like a club, feeling the stock connect with something solid. Someone slashes at him with a bayonet, opening a gash across his ribs. He grabs a helmet, his own or Japanese, he doesn't know, and uses it to batter an attacker. In the darkness, all combat becomes primal and desperate. The Marine line bends but doesn't break. Artillery fire called in danger close, meaning within 600 yards of American positions, tears apart Japanese assault formations. Machine gun crews fire until their barrels glow red in the darkness. Flares illuminate the battlefield in harsh white light, revealing scenes that will haunt survivors for decades. By dawn, the counterattack has failed. Japanese casualties are catastrophic, over 3,000 dead in a single night. But they've accomplished something significant. They've forced Americans to expend enormous ammunition reserves and exhausted troops who desperately needed rest. The psychological impact is equally significant. Every Marine who survives this night knows the Japanese will never surrender, will never stop fighting, will make every yard cost blood. General Takashina himself dies in the counterattack, killed by American artillery fire while directing his troops. His replacement, Colonel Tsunetaro Suenaga, understands that organized resistance is no longer possible. The remaining Japanese forces, perhaps 6,000 combat-effective troops, begin withdrawing to the northern end of the island, where the jungle is thickest and the terrain most difficult. The withdrawal is fighting retreat, not rout. Japanese rearguards establish positions, hold as long as possible, then fall back to the next prepared position. They mine paths, they booby-trap abandoned equipment, they leave snipers behind to slow the American advance. Every mile northward costs American lives. The 3rd Marine Division pushes up the western side of the island. The 1st Provisional Marine Brigade and elements of the 77th Infantry Division advance up the eastern side. The terrain becomes increasingly difficult. Steep ridge lines channelize movement into predictable valleys where Japanese defenders wait. Rivers must be crossed under fire. The jungle canopy is so dense that air support becomes nearly useless. Pilots can't identify targets through the vegetation. Private Eugene Sledge, who will later write the classic memoir With the Old Breed, describes the jungle fighting on Guam. You move 5 yards, stop, look, listen, move another 5 yards. Every sense is screaming danger. Every shadow could hide a sniper. Every vine could conceal a grenade booby trap. You walk in a crouch until your back feels like it's breaking. You drink water that tastes like chemicals from purification tablets because the streams are contaminated with bodies. You eat cold rations because cooking fires draw mortar fire. You don't sleep more than an hour at a time because Japanese infiltrators come every night. And you keep pushing forward because stopping means dying slowly instead of quickly. By the end of July, American forces control most of Guam below the town of Agana. But the northern jungle, over 15 miles of the most difficult terrain on the island, still contains organized Japanese resistance. The Marines and Army troops are exhausted. Units that landed with full strength are now at 60% effectiveness. Disease begins taking almost as many casualties as combat: dengue fever, dysentery, tropical infections. General Geiger, overall American commander for the operation, makes a difficult decision. He pulls the 3rd Marine Division out of the line for rest and reconstitution, replacing them with elements of the 77th Infantry Division. This is risky. The Army troops lack the Marines' experience in jungle warfare, but continuing to push exhausted men forward is equally risky. Men make mistakes when they're exhausted. Mistakes cost lives. The battle enters a new phase: methodical reduction of remaining Japanese strong points. This is warfare stripped of maneuver and strategy, reduced to the brutal arithmetic of casualties. A platoon assaults a bunker. 5 men die, 12 are wounded, the bunker is destroyed. Next bunker. Repeat. Every single day. August 1st, American forces reach Mount Santa Rosa in the northern highlands. This is the last major geographic obstacle on the island. Japanese defenders have turned the mountain into a fortress. Cave systems honeycomb the interior. Artillery pieces fire from multiple positions, then withdraw into the caves before counter-battery fire can destroy them. It's the nightmare of Mount Alifan multiplied by 10. The assault on Santa Rosa lasts 4 days. Army troops from the 77th Division fight with determination that impresses the veteran Marines. They learn the brutal lessons of cave warfare the hard way. Grenades alone don't work because caves have multiple chambers. Flamethrowers are effective, but their operators become priority targets. Sometimes the only solution is to seal the cave entrance with explosives and entomb the defenders inside. Sergeant Arthur Brill from the 306th Infantry Regiment develops a technique for clearing cave systems. First, reconnaissance to identify all cave entrances. There are always more than you initially spot. Second, suppress fire into all entrances simultaneously to force defenders to cover. Third, demolition teams place shaped charges to collapse the main entrance while flamethrower teams work on secondary openings. Fourth, wait. If anyone emerges, they're trying to escape a collapsing cave system or a fire consuming all oxygen. They'll surrender or die. Brill's squad clears 17 caves on Santa Rosa using this method. They lose 2 men, both to sniper fire during the reconnaissance phase. In comparison, other squads using less systematic approaches suffer 50% casualties attempting similar missions. Sometimes survival in war depends not on courage, but on method. August 10, 1944. The American flag flies over Agana. The airfield is operational, with American aircraft landing and taking off. The harbor is cleared of obstacles and ships unload supplies directly to the docks. By every conventional measure, Guam is secured. But the battle isn't over. Thousands of Japanese soldiers remain scattered throughout the northern jungle. Some operate in organized units with radios and officers. Others are isolated groups or even individual soldiers who have lost contact with any command structure. All are determined to keep fighting. The concept of surrender simply doesn't exist in their tactical or moral vocabulary. The American military shifts from offensive operations to security and pacification operations. Patrols sweep the jungle looking for Japanese holdouts. Checkpoints control movement on roads. Artillery and aircraft strike reported Japanese positions. It's not exciting warfare. It's not the stuff of headlines. It's just necessary, and it's deadly. Between August 10th and the official end of combat operations on August 21st, American forces suffer over 400 casualties clearing out Japanese remnants. Each casualty is a personal tragedy for families back home. Each casualty represents someone who survived the main battle only to die during the mopping up phase. Chamorro civilians emerge from hiding throughout August. They've spent 20 months under brutal Japanese occupation, forced into labor camps, subjected to arbitrary violence, watching their island transformed into a military fortress. Their intelligence proves invaluable. They know every trail, every water source, every hiding place in the northern jungle. Chamorro scouts guide American patrols to Japanese positions, preventing ambushes and saving countless American lives. Maria Cruz, a Chamorro woman who worked as a nurse before the war, establishes a hospital in Agat to treat both American wounded and Chamorro civilians suffering from malnutrition and disease. She works 20-hour days with minimal supplies, improvising treatments with whatever materials are available. She saves dozens of lives through sheer determination and medical skill. After the war, she receives commendations from both the U.S. Navy and the Guam Territorial Government. August 21st. General Geiger officially declares Guam secured. The battle has lasted 31 days. American casualties: 1,783 killed, 610 wounded. Japanese casualties: 18,337 killed, 1,250 captured. The mathematics are brutal but clear. The Japanese garrison fought nearly to the last man. But even official declarations don't end the reality. Japanese holdouts continue operating in the jungle for months, some for years. Lieutenant Masashi Ito doesn't surrender until 1952, 8 years after the battle ended. He'd been living in a cave, surviving on jungle plants and occasional raids on Chamorro farms, still believing the war continued. The most famous holdout, Sergeant Shoichi Yokoi, doesn't emerge until 1972, 28 years after the battle. He'd been hiding in the jungle the entire time, knowing the war had ended but too ashamed to surrender. When he finally returns to Japan, his first words are, "I am ashamed that I have returned alive." These aren't just curiosities. They represent the fundamental cultural divide that made the Pacific War so uniquely brutal. American military doctrine accepts surrender as a legitimate military option when further resistance is pointless. Japanese military doctrine viewed surrender as unthinkable dishonor, worse than death. This philosophical gap meant that Pacific battles couldn't end through negotiation or capitulation. They could only end through complete annihilation of one side's ability and will to fight. The Battle of Guam matters for reasons beyond the immediate tactical outcome. Understanding why requires looking at both military and human dimensions. Militarily, Guam becomes the critical base for the final phase of the Pacific War. B-29 Super Fortress bombers operating from Guam's airfields reach Tokyo, Osaka, and every major Japanese city. The strategic bombing campaign that ultimately forces Japanese surrender originates from bases on Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, the Mariana Islands that cost so much blood to capture. Without Guam, the war likely continues into 1946, possibly requiring an invasion of the Japanese home islands that could have cost 1 million casualties. The harbor at Apra becomes a major forward logistics base. Ships damaged elsewhere in the Pacific limp to Guam for repairs. Supply convoys stage through Guam on their way to forward combat zones. The island becomes what military planners call a force multiplier, a strategic asset that amplifies American military power across an entire theater of operations. But there's another significance that's harder to quantify. Guam represents liberation, not conquest. The Chamorro people are American citizens who endured occupation and looked forward to the day their own military would return. When Marines raise the flag over Agat, it's not planting the flag on enemy territory. It's restoring American sovereignty over American land. This distinction matters psychologically. Marines fighting on Guam aren't just executing a military operation. They're liberating fellow Americans. The Chamorro guides who lead patrols, the civilians who provide intelligence, the emotional reunions between Marines and civilians they've freed. All of this creates a moral dimension absent from other Pacific battles. Consider the footage that survives from the liberation. There's a film clip, grainy, black and white, damaged by decades in archives, showing Marines distributing rations to Chamorro children in August 1944. The children are emaciated, dressed in rags, clearly malnourished from 20 months of Japanese occupation. But they're smiling, laughing, touching the Marines' uniforms with wonder. One little girl, maybe 6 years old, hugs a Marine corporal's leg and won't let go. That corporal is John Basilone, already a Medal of Honor recipient from Guadalcanal. He'll die 7 months later on Iwo Jima. But in this moment, captured on film, he's kneeling down to the little girl's level, sharing his ration chocolate with her, and the expression on his face shows why men fight. Not for abstract concepts like strategy or national interest, for moments like this, for people like this little girl who deserves to grow up free. The Battle of Guam also demonstrates the evolution of American amphibious warfare. The Marines who landed on Guadalcanal in 1942 were essentially making up tactics as they went. 2 years later on Guam, amphibious assault has become a refined science, specialized landing craft, coordinated naval gunfire support, air support timed to the minute, engineer units clearing obstacles, medical evacuation procedures, supply chains that keep ammunition and water flowing to forward units. The United States developed this capability through brutal trial and error across dozens of island battles. Tarawa taught the importance of reef reconnaissance. Saipan taught the necessity of overwhelming preliminary bombardment. Each battle contributed lessons written in blood, refined into doctrine, and applied to the next operation. Guam represents the perfection of that learning curve. Yes, the battle was costly. Yes, Marines died in circumstances that seem preventable in hindsight. But compared to earlier operations, the Guam landing was remarkably successful. The beachhead was secured in hours, not days. Casualties, while significant, were lower than predicted. The two landing forces linked up ahead of schedule. These improvements represent thousands of lives saved through institutional learning. There's also a darker significance worth acknowledging. The brutality of the Battle of Guam, the close-quarters combat, the cave fighting, the Japanese refusal to surrender, foreshadows what an invasion of the Japanese home islands would entail. If Japan required this much force to defend a small Pacific island, what would defending their homeland cost? Military planners projected American casualties in the millions for Operations Olympic and Coronet, the planned invasions of Kyushu and Honshu. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki 1 year after Guam's liberation remain morally complex and historically controversial. But understanding the context requires understanding battles like Guam. Understanding that Japanese military culture viewed surrender as unacceptable dishonor. Understanding that every Pacific battle ended only with the near-complete destruction of Japanese forces. Understanding that projections for invading Japan weren't pessimistic speculation, they were reasonable extrapolations from battles like Guam, Saipan, Peleliu, and eventually Iwo Jima and Okinawa. This doesn't make the decision to use atomic weapons simple or obviously correct. History is never that clean, but it provides essential context for understanding why American leadership made the choices they made in August 1945. For the men who fought on Guam, the battle's significance is more personal and immediate. They survived something that statistics suggested they shouldn't survive. They watched friends die in circumstances so random that survival feels like cosmic accident rather than skill or courage. They did things they'd never imagined themselves capable of doing, both terrible and heroic. Frank Wytek returns to Darby, Connecticut after the war. He works in factories, he marries, raises children, lives a quiet life. He attends Marine Corps reunions where he's celebrated as a hero, though he's uncomfortable with the attention. When his children ask about the war, he gives short answers and changes the subject. The memories are too sharp, too immediate, too heavy to share with people who weren't there. He dies in 1973 at age 52. His Medal of Honor is displayed at the National Museum of the Marine Corps. Visitors walk past it daily, reading the citation describing his actions on July 25, 1944. The words are accurate but inadequate. No citation can capture what it feels like to charge machine guns with the certainty you're going to die. No medal can compensate for the weight of memories that never fade. The same is true for thousands of other men who fought on Guam. Each carried their own memories, their own wounds, both visible and invisible. Some talk about their experiences. Most don't. But all of them understand something that people who haven't experienced combat can never fully grasp. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is being absolutely terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway. Today, Guam is a thriving American territory. The capital, Agat, formerly Agana, shows few visible scars from the battle. Modern buildings replace the structures destroyed in 1944. The harbor is full of commercial and military vessels. The airfield, now Anderson Air Force Base, hosts B-52 bombers and KC-135 tankers supporting American military operations across the Pacific. But the battle's legacy remains visible for those who know where to look. On the northern beaches where Marines landed, rusting amphibious tractors still sit half buried in coral. The jungle has reclaimed most of the battlefield, but concrete pillboxes remain, slowly dissolving under decades of tropical rain. Japanese artillery pieces lie where they were destroyed, now covered in vines and slowly disappearing into the vegetation. The war in the Pacific National Historical Park preserves key battle sites. Visitors can walk the beaches, climb the escarpments, see the caves where Japanese soldiers made their final stands. Interpretive signs explain what happened here, though no sign can truly convey the terror and violence of those 31 days in 1944. Every July 21st, Guam commemorates Liberation Day, with ceremonies honoring both the Americans who liberated the island and the Chamorro people who endured occupation. Veterans attend when they can, their numbers dwindling each year as the greatest generation passes into history. Chamorro survivors share their stories, ensuring younger generations understand what their grandparents experienced. There's a memorial near Asan Beach with the names of every American service member killed during the battle. 1,783 names. Each name represents a life interrupted, a family that received a telegram they dreaded, a future that never happened. Some were 18 years old. Some were career Marines and soldiers. All died far from home in a place most Americans couldn't locate on a map. The Chamorro people maintain their own memorials to the civilians who died during occupation and battle. The Japanese military killed hundreds of Chamorro civilians during the occupation, some executed for minor infractions, others simply murdered as reprisals for suspected resistance. When the battle came, more civilians died in the crossfire. These deaths receive less attention in American military histories, but they're equally significant to the island's story. There's a question worth asking. Was it worth it? Was liberating Guam worth 1,183 American dead and over 6,000 wounded? Was it worth the destruction of Agana and the civilian casualties and the psychological scars carried by everyone who fought there? The question is easier to answer if you're Chamorro. Yes, liberation was worth it. Living under Japanese occupation was intolerable. The return of American sovereignty restored freedom, safety, and the opportunity to rebuild lives destroyed by occupation. For the Chamorro people, the Battle of Guam wasn't an abstract military operation. It was personal liberation. The question is harder to answer if you're a veteran who watched friends die on those beaches. If you're a family member who received notification that your son or brother or father would never come home. If you carry nightmares from July 1944 that still wake you up sweating in the dark. But perhaps the question itself is flawed. Wars happen because nations make them happen, not because individuals choose them. The men who fought on Guam didn't decide to invade. They followed orders based on strategic decisions made far above their pay grade. Asking whether the battle was worth it assigns agency to people who had none. They went where they were sent. They fought because that's what soldiers do. They survived or didn't based largely on chance. What we can say with certainty is that the Battle of Guam mattered. It mattered strategically, providing the base from which American air power could reach Japan. It mattered morally, liberating American citizens from brutal occupation. It mattered tactically, demonstrating the effectiveness of amphibious warfare doctrine refined through 2 years of bloody experience. And it mattered personally to everyone who was there, shaping their lives in ways both visible and invisible. The rare footage that survives from the battle shows young men in combat, moving with the controlled urgency of people under fire. They don't look heroic in the Hollywood sense. They look scared and exhausted and determined. They look like ordinary people doing extraordinary things because circumstances demanded it. That's the real story of the Battle of Guam. Not superhuman warriors, not fearless heroes. Just ordinary Americans, Marines, soldiers, sailors, Chamorro civilians, doing what needed to be done in circumstances that tested the limits of human endurance. They succeeded. The island was liberated. American sovereignty was restored. The strategic objectives were achieved. But success came at a cost measured in lives destroyed, bodies broken, and memories that would haunt survivors for decades. Stand on Asan Beach today. The surf still crashes against the reef with that sound like distant thunder. The jungle still covers the escarpments. The tropical sun still beats down with the same intensity it did in July 1944. But now it's peaceful. Now families swim in the same water where Marines died. Now tourists photograph the same cliffs that machine guns swept with fire. The peace we experience today was purchased with blood then. That's not melodrama or jingoism. That's just historical fact. Freedom isn't free sounds like a cliché until you stand on ground where men actually paid that price. Then it becomes something more than words. It becomes memory made tangible. The last thing to understand about the Battle of Guam is that it was never supposed to be this hard. Intelligence said 10 days maximum. Planning assumed light resistance. Reality delivered 31 days of savage combat that pushed American forces to their limits. This gap between expectation and reality defines Pacific War battles. Every island was supposed to be easier than it was. Every landing was supposed to face lighter resistance. Every Japanese defensive position was supposed to collapse faster. The consistent pattern wasn't incompetent intelligence. It was fundamental misunderstanding of how desperately Japan would defend every inch of territory and how impossible surrender was within their military culture. By July 1944, American military leadership should have understood this. They'd fought across the Pacific for 2 years. They'd seen the pattern repeat at Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, and every other island. Yet the plans for Guam still assumed the enemy would behave rationally, would recognize when defeat was inevitable, would surrender rather than die pointlessly. The Japanese never behaved that way. not once. Understanding why requires understanding a military culture where death was preferable to dishonor, where surrender meant not just personal shame but shame to family and ancestors. This wasn't fanaticism in the simple sense. It was a completely different cultural framework for understanding duty, honor, and acceptable behavior. The tragedy is that both sides were trapped by their own cultural frameworks. Americans couldn't comprehend fighting to literal extinction. Japanese couldn't comprehend surrender as honorable. This collision of incompatible values meant every battle became a fight to annihilation, with casualties far beyond what rational military calculation would predict. Guam exemplifies this tragedy. 18,000 Japanese soldiers died defending an island they couldn't hold, fighting a battle they couldn't win against a nation with overwhelming material superiority. Their courage was undeniable. Their tactical skill was impressive, but their deaths accomplished nothing except making widows and orphans back in Japan. The island was lost regardless of how many men died defending it. But try telling that to Lieutenant General Takashina as he directed his forces from his command post. Try explaining that surrender would save thousands of lives and change nothing strategically. He would have considered such talk treasonous. His duty was clear: defend Guam to the death. So he did, and 18,000 men died with him. This is the ultimate significance of the Battle of Guam, not just the tactical lessons or strategic outcomes, but the human cost of cultural incompatibility, the tragedy of brave men on both sides dying because their nation's values made peaceful resolution impossible. The reality that war, once started, develops its own terrible momentum that individual courage and sacrifice can't stop. The Marines who landed on those beaches in July 1944 were heroes. So were the Chamorro people who endured occupation and supported liberation. Even the Japanese soldiers defending positions they'd prepared for months showed a form of courage, however tragically misdirected. Everyone involved in the Battle of Guam displayed the best and worst of human nature: courage and brutality, sacrifice and killing, liberation and destruction. The battle wasn't simple. The combatants weren't cartoon villains or flawless heroes. They were human beings caught in circumstances that tested everything they were and forced them to discover things about themselves they'd never wanted to know. That's what we should remember about Guam, not just the tactical details or casualty statistics, but the human reality of ordinary people pushed to extraordinary extremes, doing terrible and heroic things, surviving or dying based largely on chance, and carrying the memories of those 31 days for the rest of their lives. The battle ended 79 years ago. The last veterans are now in their late 90s or have already passed. Soon, no one alive will remember fighting on Guam. The living memory will be gone, replaced by history books and preserved footage and memorials maintained by people who weren't there. But the lessons remain relevant: the importance of understanding cultural differences in conflict, the cost of strategic decisions made in Washington or Tokyo but paid for by young men on beaches far from home, the reality that liberation, however necessary, comes through violence and death, the obligation those of us who live in peace have to remember those who fought for it. Stand on Asan Beach at dawn. Watch the sun rise over the Pacific. Listen to the surf crash against the reef. And remember that 80 years ago, young men died here so that we could stand here in peace. That's the story of the Battle of Guam. Not a simple tale of good versus evil. Not a clean narrative of heroism and victory, but a complex, tragic, and ultimately significant battle that shaped history and tested human endurance in ways we should never forget.